Tracing the Ulster-Scots imagination is a unique study which seeks to evaluate and explore Ulster-Scots traditions over the centuries whilst analysing its revival in today's society. And I'm delighted to welcome in the book's author, Wesley Hutchinson, into the studio today to talk about his new book in greater detail. So Wesley, it's a pleasure having you in the studio today, and I'll just take the delve straight into the book then. It's called Tracing the Ulster-Scots Imagination. Where did the idea for this book come about? Why did you feel there was a need to academically explore the sort of roots and tradition of Ulster-Scots and its emergence in today's society?
The basic idea was that Ulster-Scots has had a pretty rough time over the past 25-30 years. There's been a considerable amount of hostility, if you like, towards the very idea of an Ulster-Scots culture, and the line that came out in media coverage and in academia was that simply there was no culture, if you like. There was no language and there was no culture, and that it was something that had been more or less invented. That was the allegation by sectors within unionism, and the objective was within a the structure set up by the Good Friday Agreement to take money away from the Irish language. That was the basic premise. I was interested in trying to show that, on the contrary, there is an ongoing tradition, one that goes back, well into the 17th century, and some people would argue much further. And the idea of the book was really to kind of trace that, to try and show how people within the community have imagined themselves primarily in the northeast of Ireland, and in relation to Scotland, where their roots supposedly lie, and in relation to the diaspora, the spaces of the diaspora. So that was the idea. It was kind of taking, if you like, as broad an overview of the culture as I could. Up until now, there's been work, very good work done in terms of academic production, but it's been, in general, very targeted, if you like, to specific poets. There have been, re-editions of novels and things, but there's been no attempt to kind of look at things from a broad perspective and with kind of with distance, if you like. And that was the idea behind the book.
And you just tell us by your answer, you're very animated and passionate about the subject. Where did your interest as a researcher and academic on Ulster-Scots? Where did that come from? Did it come from your own sort of heritage as well, coming from Antrim?
Yes, absolutely. There's a number of factors. There's a kind of family connection. Of course, my grandfather was from Stronocum in the north of Antrim. I was brought up in Ballymena, and I can remember as a child him talking to me and using Scots absolutely naturally, if you like, in the environment. My mother wasn't always that happy because she had the classic attitude that this was bad English and that my grandfather was really subversive, and I was really close to my grandfather. I really liked him, so he was great fun. And I can remember coming back from school the first day in school, and he didn't want me to go to school because he knew that what was going to happen. And when I came back from school, he asked me about did the teacher tell me how to spell shach, you see, and I said no, that you hadn't, and he said, well, I'll tell you, and he says it's spelled S-H-U-H. There's that kind of connection there, but there was also because the more I read, if you like, the more interested I became, and the more I realized that there was a lot of work to be done. The problem is that a lot of the stuff is invisible. It's absolutely invisible. It's been obliterated, if you like. A lot of the stuff that I was working on in the book would have appeared in local newspapers, or and would have fed into the local community, and it would have been a one-off. Stuff that would have appeared in a newspaper and then, it was shoved in a corner or thrown into the bin, and that was it. Or published in, very limited editions, small numbers, locally or whatever. And so there was no real canon, no attempt, nobody even thought of the concept, if you like, of an Ulster-Scots canon. Is that a possibility? It's only when we get the work by Frank Ferguson, with his anthology, that we begin to see the possibility of going in that direction. So yeah, there was that. There was the family connection in the first place, and there was also the fact that the stuff was really interesting, and not only interesting but interconnected. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't they were referring back, if you like, to earlier stuff, and they knew that they were operating inside a tradition, and it was those linkages, if you like, which were important and which had been very largely forgotten or obliterated. And it was just an attempt to sort of demonstrate, if you like, those continuities, and highlight them within one piece of work.
As you've alluded to, there is a lot of gaps with the Ulster-Scots and its history, and how significance passages in their history shaped the Northern Ireland as we know it today. Can you give us a brief overview then of what this book aims to sort of delve into, to explore as well? And it must have been quite a challenge then. And as you said, Ulster-Scots arrived in Ireland around the 17th century, so that's almost over 400 years of history that you've had to delve into in a couple of hundred pages.
Yes, that's right, 450. The thing is that when I started the book, and I was kind of looking at the material that I was aware of, because, if you like, there's been a sea change in my attitude from the material, from the point of view of what I thought existed when I started looking at this 10 years ago, and what I know now, if you know what I mean. And when I looked at it at the beginning, I thought very much along the lines of many people, there was this idea of an invented tradition that is very difficult to get out of your head, because the idea is that the Ulster-Scots kind of goes in and out of focus, if you like, if you know what I mean. You get periods where of activity, indeed hyperactivity, around the tail end of the 18th century and into the first half of the 19th century. Then you get it again at the tail end of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century around Home Rule. And then things re-emerge again in the 1990s, if you see what I mean. And so you sort of say, what's happening? Does it just exist in those periods? And of course the answer is no, it goes on, but much at a kind of subterranean level, if you know what I mean. So that was one of the things, was to try and join up the dots. That was one of my preoccupations. Like, you've got these big things, the plantation at the beginning of the 17th, and then the other things that I've just mentioned. But what happens in between those periods, if you like, of hyperactivity, when you're getting the Weaver poets, when you're getting the Kailyard novels being produced by the local newspapers in County Down and County Antrim, and everybody's reading them, all the people in the area are reading them, or the revival period of the past 25, 30 years. I was trying to kind of show continuities there. But one of the preoccupations was therefore to find some sort of common thread, if you like, that went through that. And the thread that runs through it is the idea of space and the way the Ulster-Scots community imagines itself in space. One of the key, elements within nationalist discourse, and whether that's political nationalism or cultural nationalism, is the presumption that the Unionist community and the Ulster-Scots community, and I would hasten to open a bracket here saying that I do not consider the two to be synonymous at all, but that one of the basic presumptions, if you like, in the analysis, in nationalist analysis, is that that those communities are Irish, if you see what I mean, that they are anchored in Ireland, and that they are, if you like, a sort of a subdivision of that. And what the book tries to show is that the people themselves, people who belong to the Ulster-Scots community, are looking at things in a radically different perspective. They are indeed in Ireland, absolutely. But what they see, what they imagine, if you like, is Scots space in Ireland, which makes things very different. And one of the things there is, of course, this constant link to Scotland. It's amazing when you look at the material they write, because the book looks not only at literature, but also at history writing, the way people within the community produced history. One of the key sources of that, would have been the Presbyterian ministers who are writing the story of Presbyterianism in Ireland. But basically, they keep talking about Scotland all the time, and they're always going over to Scotland. They're educated in Scotland. They go over into Scotland when Presbyterianism is more or less banned by the Anglican authorities. They go over to Scotland to baptise their children, to find wives and husbands and bring them back to the northeast of Ireland, etc. So all of that is that Scottishness, that shared cultural area between the northeast of Ireland and Scotland is important. And that's what makes it different, if you like, from a nationalist, an Irish nationalist or Irish Republican perspective, because within the Ulster-Scots community, there is invariably an east-west dimension. What the Ulster-Scots are doing is saying, we're in this corner of the northeast of Ireland, but we're linked in to Scotland. Scotland is an emotive, personal, political and cultural reality to us. Ireland, if you like, isn't enough. We're here, we're in Ireland, but we're linked into Scotland as well. And it's that kind of imaginative response to space that I was interested in there.
And on the island of Ireland, space is quite a contentious issue. Everyone has their own idea of what Ireland is, what isn't in Ireland. Do you think that this attributes to maybe why Ulster-Scots has been overlooked somewhat academically, say, compared to Irish nationalism or unionism?
Absolutely. The result, if you like, of the ongoing hostility, if you like, towards Ulster-Scots has been that work on Ulster-Scots has been actively discouraged. And so, that I think is undeniable. And it, people are loath to get involved in an academic study of it's all right, if you like, to look at individual authors, like Orr or Thompson or people, individual authors, because that's almost you're looking at them as an author, not as part of a broader Ulster-Scots discourse, if you like. And I think there's a sort of a ripple effect, if you like, which originates with that hostility and which makes publication in and about Ulster-Scots difficult, because people are loath to take the step, the risk, if you like, of taking something on board that might be the object of attack, if you see what I mean. And so there is a form of, control, I think. And that was one of the things that annoyed me, if you like. And it was that's sort of one of the things that actually was the reason for doing it.
And one of the narratives that's sort of been presented to the public is that this sort of invention of the Ulster-Scots language and culture and history was this sort of direct funding from the Irish language and sort of Irish culture. What's your views on that? And do you think that, it's very easy here in Northern Ireland as well for aspects of an particular culture to be weaponized or politicized?
Yes, and I think that I've lived in France for 40 years, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the debate in Northern Ireland, in the north of Ireland, whichever you prefer, in terms of the space you want to frame, is one of the most strident debates in Europe, and it's because of the politicization of language and culture across the board. I think I can say that in both cases, whether it's Irish or Ulster-Scots, neither of them would have been in the position that they're in today if it hadn't been for political backing. Do you know, both of them are carried, if you like, by political support. Whether that's a good thing or not is, another debate. But when you look, I organised a debate, a conference in Paris in 2016 about lesser used languages, which are close to major world languages like French or English, or major European languages like German or Polish. And one of the things to emerge was that the degree of hostility towards Ulster-Scots was infinitely higher than, for example, towards Gallo or Alsatian vis-a-vis German.
Why?
Or whatever. Political tension, extreme political tension. It's all part of the same, laboratory, if you like. I think that things are perhaps improving a bit. What's really important, I think, is for people to sort of try and get to a stage where there can be shared experience. And that's one of the things that I try to do in the book, is to try and show, how, issues that are looked at by the Ulster-Scots are looked at in the Irish tradition, and that's really interesting, to look at, because there are differences. For example, if you look at people like McCool, who are going over to Scotland, to work as tatty hokers, and you compare that with the people leaving from County Down, going over to, the west of Scotland for the harvests. You're not going to get the same representations, but frequently you do get the same representations, and that's what's important. So I think that there's a real potential for dialogue. One of the other things to come out of it, which actually only really emerged sharply in my own head, was the attitude of people in the late 19th century towards Ulster-Scots, people who were writing in Ulster-Scots, or who were being represented as speaking Ulster-Scots, for example, up in County Antrim. And there was a really infinitely more relaxed attitude towards Irishness, and towards the fact that the Catholic community was also involved in using Scots, that people from the Catholic community were reading Burns. They understood Burns because everybody around them was speaking like that, so they could read, material like that. And people were perfectly relaxed about that. And that was something that I want to push further, because I think it's important to look at those crossovers, and we can't hope to move forward, if you like, on the debate about language and culture until we get to, everybody talks about mutual respect and mutual understanding, but until we get a basis, if you like, where there can be some sort of an exchange on the basis of concrete evidence, I think we're going to have some problems still.
And for the revival of the Ulster-Scots as well in society now, an important aspect of that is the interest and the emergence of information on the immigration of Ulster-Scots to America. Yes. What do you attribute to this interest in this particular element of Ulster-Scots? And you'd earlier said how both Irish and Ulster-Scots cultures and languages are where they are today because of being backed or supported by politicians. Do you feel that in today's society now, over the course of maybe the last 4 or 5 centuries, no, the island of Ireland is at peace? You know, there were so many sort of rebellions, violence and wars going on over the course of the sort of 4 or 5 centuries explored in your book. Do you think that we're now starting to look outward and trying to generate, you know, that sort of tourism interest, and we're trying to get people, you know, from afar in America and Australia to come back and to find out more about their own heritage? Do you think that scope or demand for sort of tourism money as well has helped propel Ulster-Scots in today's society?
Yes, I think that's very true. I think that what we see happening, if you like, in Ulster-Scots and the Scots-Irish connection, if you like, in particular, is something that is a phenomenon that's worldwide, and something which is in reaction to globalization. I think that, but it's also to do with education. The thing that, what emerges if you read, the material about the movement of population, the migration of especially Presbyterians from the north of Ireland from the beginning of the 18th century. The first one is really in 1718, where we get the first. It's a very good website, on that issue of 1718 and that initial movement, over towards the east coast of America. You see that, as the beginning of a series of movements. But those, how should I say, those groups had been very largely obliterated, if you like, by the famine, and by the movement of people who were primarily from a Catholic background, moving to America. And a lot of the work that has been done in America around the issue of the Scots-Irish. And it was something that started really at the tail end of the 19th century. We get this kind of flowering of interest in the late 19th century on the theme of the Scots-Irish, or the Scotch-Irish as they call them over there. And the objective there, if you like, was to show differences, if you like, between the groups. And I think that is still a part of what is ongoing in America, is the idea that people are interested in their origins in an increasingly globalized society. And I think that there's an awful lot of mileage still left there for people to sort of track themselves into Ulster, and further back indeed into Scotland. And that's, I think, that's a major facet of the work.
The revival of Ulster-Scots interest here in Northern Ireland, and of course in the rest of the world as well, which has been very positive, and I'm sure very welcome by academics such as yourself. But there seems to be this constant debate going on of dialect versus language. Why do you think that this argument is constantly in the media and is constantly argued? And why do you think it's important that we get the characterisation of Ulster-Scots correct?
Well, I mean, the thing is that it is indeed an area which comes up frequently. I would not be a linguist, so I'm not able to sort of go into that in any great detail to contribute anything useful to that debate. It's something we were talking about, lesser used languages across Europe, and it's a debate that we find right the way across Europe with languages like Gallo or Alsatian. Are they simply a subcategory of French or German, as the case may be? I see Ulster-Scots as being a dialect of Scots. I think that seems to be a kind of a compromise situation. It has to do with status, really. That coincides with the education system, battering, the elements of the language out of the children, just as with Irish, where you get the batascóir being used by school teachers and parents, might I add, to batter the Irish out of the children. You get the same phenomenon, exactly, rigorously the same phenomenon in Scots. I can remember as a child, being told by the teachers not to use words that to me were, quite normal. And so there was a concerted attempt, whether here or in France, and presumably elsewhere in Europe, towards the imposition of dominant languages.
And what do you think then is needed to sort of promote Ulster-Scots culture and heritage and the language here in Northern Ireland?
Young people.
What's the challenges then with getting young people to engage with it?
When you look at what you see going on in the Irish language, it's terrific to see so many young people involved in that kind of cultural affirmation. And I think that what we need is for Ulster-Scots and what we see in Ulster-Scots happening, which is extremely positive, is to see the way children are being taught music, they're being given a kind of a cultural frame in which to operate, and I think that is going to facilitate things. But what we need is to get that more deeply inserted into the school curriculum. There have been efforts in that direction up until now. Those have to be increased, they have to be developed. And what we need as well is we need young authors who are going to talk about things that young people are interested in. Not necessarily memories of grandparents or whatever, but talking about things that young people are interested in. The kind of thing that you get in Scots. There's a very active, production in Scots. We need the same kind of thing over here.
And just finally, Tracing the Ulster-Scots Imagination is out now. How can people get their hands on the book? You've said how young people are needed to sort of propel Ulster-Scots culture and society. I mean, how can this book, or how do you hope this book sort of raises the profile of Ulster-Scots here in Northern Ireland?
Well, I hope it will act as a sort of a statement, if you like, of the existence of a coherent, connected cultural history. That's really what it seeks to do, to say that, if this is happening today and we're looking at things in these terms, we should see how things were being looked at in the 19th century, in the 18th century, and in the 17th century, and we find connections there. It's those connections that give validity, if you like, to what is being done today. It removes, if you like, the central attack, which consists in saying that this has been made up. This whole thing has been made up. It isn't made up. And that's basically what the book tries to do. You can get it in the Ulster-Scots agency, in the Ulster-Scots hub, and we're trying to get it online at the minute, and hopefully that'll happen soon.
Well, Wesley, it's been wonderful having you in the studio today, and thanks again for coming in.
Thank you very much.